Well, the South African Child Gauge 2015 report released by UCT this week focuses on the theme of youth and intergenerational transmission of poverty. Well, that publication focuses on the situation of young people between 15 and 24 years old. It also highlights the need for a range of interventions that continue to support children as they transition into the crucial developmental stages of adolescence and young adulthood. The Children's Institute at UCT is one of the contributors of this crucial report. Jeanette Jobson is the Director of Programs at the D.G. Murray Trust and is one of the lead contributors of this report. And she joins us now from our Sea Point studios. Good afternoon, Jeanette, and thank you for your time on the News Today desk.
Thank you so much for having me, Kirshni.
Jeanette, what is intergenerational poverty and why is it so very difficult to break what's become a vicious cycle at this point?
I think you describe it so well as a vicious cycle, Kirshni, and I think this is a really important concept for South Africans to understand, which is that if you're born into a situation of poverty in this country, the likelihood is that your children and the children that come after them are also going to be stuck in that poverty situation. And so a lot of what the Child Gauge this year is doing is trying to focus in both on this issue that we're transmitting poverty generation by generation, but also that if we can break the cycle, particularly with this generation of young people, that we will see a radically different trajectory for the country as a whole.
Jeanette, we've seen recent student protests flare up across the country against fee hikes, really giving new impetus to a report at this point. Speak to us about this very important link between accessibility to education and poverty, and more importantly, how does low quality education become a poverty trap, so to speak?
I think this is actually one of the critical findings in the Gauge this year. And really what we're seeing with the Fees Must Fall protests is that if you look at what it takes for a young child who hasn't necessarily had access to quality early childhood development, who then goes into primary school and high school and don't necessarily have quality, but if they even make it through that system, and only 8% of the grade ones who start actually make it out of matric and into university, they're then facing this massive structural constraint of the massively high fees that universities charge, and that's not necessarily putting blame on the universities, but also that then the way in which they survive is very hard during their studying. And what we end up seeing, for instance, is that only 28% of students who are receiving financial aid actually end up graduating, and largely that's driven by all of these structural constraints that are playing on them. So what we need to really do is link the Fees Must Fall movement to a broader conversation about the quality of early childhood development, the quality of our schooling, particularly at a foundation phase level, and then how we're making sure we prevent school dropouts in the high school phase. Because what we're seeing, we have matric exams at the moment, but only about 49% of students in high school end up writing matric exams. The other 51% are dropping out. And the trajectory that they end up on is one that leads almost directly into unemployment. And we really need to break this cycle of poor quality education, even though we've increased the access to education, leading to poor outcomes for young people.
Yes, Jeanette, I hear you, but these structural constraints, poor quality education, is also very much the legacy left behind by apartheid inequalities, if you will. But the reality is that more than half our young people, and it comes out explicitly in your report, live below the poverty line. That's 59% of our youth in that age bracket, 15 to 24 years, are living in households now with less than 620 Rand per person per month. But poverty is indeed a multi-dimensional problem, is it not? Take us through some forms of deprivation a young person in this particular financial situation would face. We want to try and get a sense of what it means, what it feels to wake up poor in South Africa every day, and what are the challenges there right now.
Well, I think this is really crucial, that poverty is not just about the finances of a family or of an individual. It's not just about that 620 Rand income. It's also about all the other social capitals that come along with being in a particular position in society. The ability to access, for instance, quality healthcare is very much determined by where you live, by the levels of inequality that your parents have faced and your grandparents have faced. And there's a range of indicators that we should be looking at to understand poverty not as financial alone, but as understanding your ability to fulfill your potential in life. And that is constrained by your health, by your access to education and quality education. It's constrained by, for instance, the cost of transport, which is a really deep apartheid legacy that we have to deal with as young people transition into the labor market, which is that the vast majority of young people who are financially poor are also based in far distances and at high transport costs away from the major centres where there may well be employment for them. Another major structural constraint that we don't think about too often is, for instance, the high cost of mobile data. So while we imagine that young people are living in an information age, in South Africa we have some of the highest cost of mobile data in the world, and it's really constraining young people's ability to access the kinds of information that could help them navigate their own way out of these situations of poverty and into employment and into new opportunities, either educational or in the workplace.
Jeanette, in the National Youth Policy 2020 consultations, we heard from young people across the country. Many were very adamant, very vociferous, that they don't want a handout. They don't want to be seen as charity cases. What they want is access to opportunities. How crucial is it for any development program to place the youth at the center of their very own development?
This is an absolutely fundamental point, and I think it's one that a lot of organizations that are working with young people would make, and young people make themselves all the time, which is that if we approach young people in this country with a deficit mindset, if we think they're just a ticking time bomb about to explode and destroy the country, that what we're doing is we're not actually giving them the structural support as well as the space to grow their own agency to be able to navigate their own ways. And there's some fantastic examples around the country of programs that are supporting young people to innovate their own solutions to the really tough problems facing other young people. One that comes to mind immediately is the Activate Change Drivers Network, which is 1,500 young people across the country who are in all of these local communities busy running educational programs, working on issues such as sanitation and health to make sure that we have a strong environment for young people and children. And I think if we understood that we could get behind young people's own efforts, what we'd see is that we'd come up with strategies that capitalize on the real potential that lies in having a large young population. And that's really a crucial shift in policy, and it's been so wonderful to see the National Youth Policy make that shift, certainly in some of the rhetoric that surrounds it. We're still waiting for a strong implementation plan to come alongside it, and we really do hope that that implementation plan includes aspects that do deal with the real crisis we are facing with young people, but also aspects that really do approach this as a partnership with young people who are striving themselves in multiple different ways every single day to find the solutions for their own lives and for the lives of other young people around them.
Of course, we don't want the policy to read as just a wish list. But interestingly, just a generation ago, we had strong youth-coordinated youth protests that helped topple a discriminatory, vicious regime. Are we, to some extent, seeing that kind of engagement and that kind of fervour from our youth population again? Youth are not as apathetic as previously thought, Jeanette.
No, and I think it's such a misconception that sometimes the public has about young people. You know, I'm very honoured in the work that I get to do to work with a range of youth organisations across the country. And there's certainly no absence of creativity, energy and spark. And I think what's very interesting for the young people today is that really what we're trying to figure out how to do is to at the same time raise issues of injustice. And I think a lot of the fees must fall and roads must fall movements, decolonization of higher education is about putting squarely that issues of injustice and inequality on the table. But at the same time, what we're seeing from young people is that they're also trying to come up with very interesting solutions to these issues. In the Gauge, we profile, for instance, one youth-led organization called Ikamva Youth, which is working in 21 different communities across the country now, getting young high school kids through school with fantastic matric marks. And it's youth to youth, it's peer to peer. And I think if we can combine the real spirit of activism that we're seeing in so many of these student movements, and that we saw in 76, next year is the 40th anniversary of the 76 uprising, if we can take that very deep sense of the need to change an unjust and an unequal society, and we can combine it with new innovations, we can combine it with new ways of solving these very entrenched structural problems, then I think what we'll see emerging from this generation, and I'm absolutely convinced we will see it, is a whole new wave of being in this country, and a whole range of new solutions to really age-old problems.
Thank you, Jeanette. That was Jeanette Jobson, Director of Programs at the D.G. Murray Trust. Thank you for sharing your insights with us on the News Today desk. Moving on to